Hey everybody, Green Films Official here. 2024 was a really interesting year for film with a lot of great releases, but I did not talk about those movies in my previous video. So now that that video is done, I think it's only fair that I give the best of 2024 their time to shine. So without further ado, let's get right into the ranking. Longlegs is a bit of an interesting case because for a while it wasn't in my top 5 of the year. Don't get me wrong, I really loved it. I gave it a glowing review on my Letterboxd. But I just thought it had some issues in the last third that prevented it from being as good as some of the other films that came out last year. But then I sort of started to realize something. I couldn't stop thinking about it. This film really wormed its way into my brain. And it did so for a lot of reasons, which after a certain point made me realize, oh dang, Longlegs is one of my favorite films of 2024. Now, admittedly, I am somewhat biased towards this film because I love detective stuff and I love horror. So you combine the two and I'm very eager to get into that. But I also like to think that it's just an incredible film. For one, this film has an incredibly unique style that I am obsessed with. A lot of horror films rely on close-ups to make the viewer uncomfortable, really bring you in close, make you feel claustrophobic, make you see every little detail of the person's face. But Longlegs pulls the camera back to make you uncomfortable. Through its use of wide shots, Longlegs frames its world in a way that forces you to look around the image, wondering who or what is hiding behind that corner. The film is shot in a way that actively feeds into your paranoia. At no point do you feel that any of the main characters are truly safe. This isn't yet another film about things that pop out at you. It's about the things you notice creeping in the background. To quote Chris Stuckman, Longlegs is a film that makes you think, screw that doorway, man. But it's also just as much about what you don't see and how that fuels your imagination. A dude will get abruptly shot in the face, but you won't see the assailant. A murder will happen, but it'll happen behind a wall, leaving your brain to fill in the gory details. There's this part where the main character, Lee Harker, notices some trees and it just slowly zooms in. Makes you squint and lean forward and think, huh? Something over there? It's that simple yet brilliant psychological horror filmmaking that messes with your head. Eventually though, the evil stops hiding in the shadows and we're presented to Nicolas Cage as the titular Longlegs, and holy shit. His behavior, the way he moves, the sound of his voice. Nicolas Cage sort of has a reputation for hamming it up a bit, and he utilizes that here to truly make this character feel like a creepy weirdo. This film does have some amusing Nicolas Cage moments, if you know what I mean. This part where he's harassing this girl at a convenience store is basically played for comedy.
Cuckoo, 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 cuckoo.
I don't know what that was supposed to be.
But these moments never take away from the darkness of his character. You can tell there is something deeply malignant in this man. Often, even within these same moments, he turns it from being kind of funny to really uncomfortable in a heartbeat.
And what day is your birthday, little angel?
There are scenes with him that made me feel violated.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
There is this incredible interrogation scene that is framed so that he's staring directly into the camera like you're seeing him through Lee's eyes. You feel trapped with him in this scene, forced to stare into his soul as he rants about this weird shit.
Now all the way down. And get right down to the dirty, dirty work. Work that gets dirty as it cleans.
I've heard some people say that this movie feels like an entirely different movie whenever Longlegs is around, and they say that as if that's a bad thing, but I like that about it. For me, it made his presence that much more effective, because things just felt different when he was around. It was the perfect contrast to the straight-faced investigation that made up the rest of the film. I really liked this film's main character, Lee Harker. At first, she seems kind of flat and uninteresting, but as the film goes on, you learn more about her and her past, and you realize there is a real element of tragedy to this character. You get the sense that this is a very sheltered person who never had the chance to live a normal life. And throughout the film, you can see the toll that this has taken on her, and it creates for a very investing character who you not only feel sorry for, but want to succeed. One of the main factors of this film's story is Lee's relationship with her mother, and their relationship feels strained in a way where you feel like something is missing. They clearly love each other, they hug when they see each other, they talk on the phone, but something just doesn't feel quite right. They're just so different from each other, and Lee's mom is clearly mentally disturbed in a way that creates this tension between them.
But these are things a little girl shouldn't know.
I'm not a child anymore, Mom.
You're not a child because you were allowed to grow up.
Allowed?
This is a cruel world. Especially for the little things. Not all of them are allowed to live.
What are you talking about?
You just get the impression that Lee has no comfort to fall back on, not even with her own mother. Although they don't even share that much screen time together and there are plenty of other supporting characters, Lee feels alone with Longlegs in this world. And although she is the FBI agent hunting him down, she feels more like the mouse in this cat and mouse game. There is a distinct coldness to this film's mood. The world itself feels apathetic to these murders that plague it. This movie just feels evil. I saw a beast rise up out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on each horn he wore 10 crowns, and on each head was written a blasphemous name, and that name was... Look Back is a film that I almost don't want to talk that much about in this video because I believe that it warrants its own video. But it did make it to the top 5, so I probably should say a few things about it. Look Back is a film about 2 girls with a shared passion for creating manga, and the basic plot focuses on their blossoming relationship and what happens when a tragedy separates them forever. Look Back is, in a way, sort of a personal one for me. It really hit me on an emotional level, and I related to a lot of it. If you want to talk purely technicals, my god, the animation is outstanding. The little details are mind-blowing. Like, you could see the reflection of light in the wooden floorboards. Like, what? But it doesn't just look pretty, it often enhances the story. During the film's emotional moments, it has this, like, sense of flow, and the color just bursts into life. When these characters are at their happiest, the image almost feels like it's melting from the sheer power of their joy. And it also helps that these characters are incredibly well written and the film tells its story in a way that makes you care. It isn't a very long film. In fact, it just barely qualifies as a feature film. And normally for something like this that's very character driven, I would like to spend as much time with these characters as possible. But the shorter runtime works in its favor because it makes you feel robbed of time with these people who you love so much. And I think that fits really well with the film's story of permanent separation. There is a setup and payoff in this movie that is goddamn brutal. It is an act of emotional terrorism as far as I'm concerned. But at its core, Look Back is a film about creating art and why we do it, and I think that's where it really got me in the end. I think for any aspiring artist for any art form, whether it be film, comics, or whatever, this film is very validating and even motivating. It's a film that makes you want to make things, and I think that is incredibly valuable. It just works in every way. The animation is mind-blowing, the story is human and compelling, and its message really resonates. It is genuinely one of the best dramas I've seen, and if you haven't seen it yet, you should probably get on that right now. Vampires, those slender, hideous, humanoid creatures of the night who feast on blood and disintegrate in the sunlight. Kinda like my friend Raphael the Film Nerd.
Hey, I heard that.
I am kinda cynical about remakes, especially horror remakes. I'm not inherently against remakes, I just feel that a lot of the time they're just worse versions of already great movies, or worse versions of great foreign movies, because God forbid people explore other cultures, right? I think if you are gonna remake a film that's already fantastic, you need to really justify doing so. To me, the shining gold standard of remakes, in a way, will always be Gore Verbinski's The Ring and Peter Jackson's King Kong. Because sure, the originals are already great, but these films don't try to replace the original. They're not just worse versions of those films. They are different versions of those films. They are taking these great stories and just simply doing them in another way, whether it be stylistically or atmospherically. Especially with Peter Jackson's King Kong, it feels like it's asking, how can we tell this old story in whole new ways with newer technology? These films exist in harmony alongside the originals, rather than trying to replace them like some kind of evil doppelganger. That isn't to say necessarily that they're the #1 best remakes ever made. That title will always go to John Carpenter's The Thing for me. But it is to say that what I would like to see out of remakes, at least if you're going to remake a good movie, ideally, bad movies that have potential should be the ones getting remade, but that shit never happens. Basically what I'm getting at here is when I heard Nosferatu was being remade by Robert Eggers, I was like, damn, okay. Robert Eggers is straight up one of my favorite filmmakers ever. Even though I think his previous film, The Northman, is a bit of a disappointment, that doesn't make me think any less of him. His passion for history and his commitment to historical accuracy is remarkable. But more than that, he has just such a distinct style, and he usually tells really compelling stories with a lot of great thematic depth, but are also just really fascinating and interesting on their own. And he isn't afraid to get a little weird or freaky with it. So when you take Nosferatu, which is already a historical period piece horror film, he was the perfect man for the job. I'm sorry, but there was no one better. I watched the original Nosferatu for the first time in preparation for this remake, and God, it just blew my mind, man. Not only is it just a beautifully crafted film and genuinely quite creepy here and there, but it just has this epic scale to it. It just feels large and massive. And I just thought for a 1922 film, it was kind of just, again, mind-blowing. And I think, at least as of right now, it might change, but as of right now, I think it's my favorite silent film. So when I first watched Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, I thought it was really amazing, but I preferred the original. Like, I thought it was a technical marvel and just really impressive in a lot of ways, but I felt that two of my favorite story segments from the original were just sort of skimmed over, and also there were just a few other things I wasn't 100% on. But then I watched it again, and maybe I was just in a good mood that day and I was watching it with two of my closest friends in the whole wide world. But now, I think I might like it a bit better than the original. I like it at least as much, but that's saying a lot because I think the original is one of the best horror films ever made. I mentioned before that I think this film is a technical marvel, and my god, the visuals, the atmosphere, the production value, the costume design, the cinematography. On a purely aesthetic level, this film is delicious! I want to suck this shit right up the way Count Orlok sucks up blood. Yum yum yum, get it right in me. But not only is the imagery beautiful, a lot of the time it's quite clever, like when Count Orlok sticks his hand out of a window and the shadow of his hand creeps over the town to show how much power he has over it. But thankfully, the aesthetics don't overshadow the story and characters. On a basic surface level, the story is mostly pretty much identical to the original, but there are a few little tweaks and changes and a couple added Robert Eggers-isms that really make it feel like his version. It even manages to improve on some of the lesser qualities of the original story. Everything involving the character Knock is infinitely better than it was in the original. Not to say it was bad in the original, just it left some room for improvement. For one, Knock is a lot freakier here than he was in the original, and in the original, there was this plot line where he gets arrested and thrown in jail, and then he escapes and starts causing trouble around town, and the only thing this subplot really leads to is him getting thrown back in jail, so it feels a bit redundant. But here, once he escapes jail, he's out of jail for the rest of the movie. Ellen Hutter was already the most interesting character in the original Nosferatu, but Robert Eggers' Ellen Hutter is an amazing character. Not only is Lily Rose Depp's performance utterly incredible, but the film just adds so much to her backstory and makes her feel more interconnected with Count Orlok in a way that is really disturbing, but also really intriguing. I was utterly invested and captivated every second she was on screen. Not to say I wasn't invested or captivated by the rest of the film, but my god, just what an engrossing character. She's just so dripping with personality, and you always get the impression that there's more to her than the film is letting on. I loved her so much in this. Genuinely a perfect iteration of her character. Got Willem Dafoe in there playing a guy who's kind of a weirdo, but he's also super knowledgeable and friendly, and you can tell he just wants to help out as much as possible. Kind of role he was born to play. I loved him. But man, Count Orlok, the titular Nosferatu, god, they knocked it out of the park with him. I'm starting to think Bill Skarsgård is one of the best character actors of all time. He just completely disappears into this role. His performance is incredible, the makeup is incredible, the costume is incredible, and god, he is just so sinister here. Like, the Count Orlok in the original was very creepy, but Count Orlok in this film just feels like a very vile creature. He's just, like, so gross and despicable. He just has this, like, tinge of, like, lustfulness, which is partially there in the original, but is amplified by a lot here. He feels like a, like, fiend in this. My mother once said that vampires are interesting because they're like humans and you can talk to them and they're, like, thinking and intelligent. And I have to say, I agree with her a lot. One of the best scenes in this movie is where Count Orlok appears in Ellen's room and they just have a conversation like two people. Granted, it's not a normal conversation, but that's kind of besides the point. Again, like, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think what is most impressive about this remake is that it, like, respects the original source material while still making sure to be uniquely Robert Eggers. This is not the only time Nosferatu has been remade. I think this is, like, hang on, 1, 2, 3, at least the third remake. At least if you want to count this bullshit version anyway. So this very easily could have just been another retread of Nosferatu. So thank God they got Robert Eggers. There is a scene in this film where, after an argument, Ellen and her husband Thomas have sex to spite Count Orlok. Like, that is such a Robert Eggers moment. But I think by and large, Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, on top of being Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, is a dark, atmospheric, and gripping story-driven horror epic that takes itself seriously, which is something I have been craving from modern cinema for a long time. The Substance is another film I almost don't want to say too much about in this video, because I think it warrants a spectacularly strange cinema video. Yes, I know it's been a while. I intend to make more for Spectacularly Strange Cinema, don't worry. But again, it did make it into the top 5, so it would be remiss of me to not talk about some general thoughts of stuff that I liked about it. The Substance is body horror at its finest, simple as that. It is disgusting and revolting and it makes you squirm, but that in itself isn't the point, unlike some other body horror films I can think of. Sure, being shocking and disgusting is part of this movie's point. It's a body horror film after all, but it isn't the whole point. There is an actual compelling story here. This film explores the crazy beauty standards of popular culture, and it does so through an incredibly clever way. Basically, you can purchase the titular substance, and it produces like a younger, more beautiful version of you. But if you misuse the substance, this younger version of you can sort of quickly take control over your life and just destroy you completely. It's not subtle, which I feel like should bother me more, but it's not subtle in a way that's not annoying. It doesn't feel like it's bashing its message into your head because the message isn't getting in the way of the story. In fact, it serves the story. Not only is the cinematography gorgeous, but the way this film uses simple but brilliant imagery to communicate its ideas is genuinely masterful. There is a shot, although I suppose it's more of a montage, of involving the Hollywood Walk of Fame early on in the film that I thought was genius. The whole plot of this film is set into motion because Elizabeth Sparkle, the main character played by Demi Moore, who gives an incredible performance, by the way. Anyway, she gets fired from her aerobic show that she stars in because she's 50, she's too old. But the first time you see her, it's almost like a glamour shot, which does a great job at highlighting just how ridiculous this all is. Remember before when I was talking about how horror films often use close-ups to make you uncomfortable? Yeah, The Substance is a prime example of that. Some of the close-ups in this film are... Oh, God, I haven't even mentioned the sound design yet. God, the way this movie sounds is incredible. If I'm being dead ass, I don't really care that much about the Oscars, honestly. I think the idea for an award show centered around film is kind of stupid to begin with, but I think it is criminal that this film was not even nominated for Best Sound Design. When Elizabeth's younger self, born from the substance, emerges out of her back, and she's sort of like getting used to this new body, and just the sound design feels like really heady, like almost like her hearing hasn't fully developed yet or something. And there's this sort of liquidy sound in the background as well. It just sounds amazing. That whole scene had my jaw on the floor. This film gets every little detail visually with the close-ups, but it gets every little detail audibly with the sound. This film sounds yucky just as much as it looks yucky. The body horror of this film is executed so well. This is on the same level as David Cronenberg's The Fly, and I do not say that lightly. There is a scene towards the end of the film where Elizabeth is crawling her way towards her bathroom mirror, and it's sort of like a POV shot, and I was genuinely petrified to see just how much the substance had messed with her body at that point. This film is genuinely scary, dude. A lot of it is actually quite unpleasant. It's like flinching and cringing and tensing up the whole movie. But this is what makes it work so well and why it's such an incredible piece of horror filmmaking. Oh my god, and I almost forgot to mention how great Margaret Qualley is as Sue, Elizabeth's younger self. Her performance is honestly on par with Demi Moore's. These are two incredible actresses at the top of their game. I also like that this isn't primarily a scary film. Like, don't get me wrong, it's primarily a horror film. But it's also, like, funny and sad and dramatic. You feel a whole wide range of emotions watching this thing. I think when people say a film is emotional, that tends to mean, oh, it was, like, melancholic. But I feel this film is emotional just in the wide range of things you feel while watching it. Was I crying my eyes out? No, but you better believe I was emotional while watching this film. I could talk about this movie for ages, but I think at that point we'd be getting into stuff I want to save for its own spectacularly strange cinema video. So for now, I'll just say, wow, what a sucker punch of a film, man. The Substance is a repulsive yet awe-inspiring experience. And I don't know what more you could want from a horror film than that. On a side note, there was a guy at my screening who was seeing it with his girlfriend, And during an early scene with Margaret Qualley, he leaned into her and said, "Oh, that's so hot." I wonder what he thought of the second half. Yeah, obvious choice is obvious, but maybe sometimes the obvious choice is obvious for a reason, god damn it. Because man, Dune Part 2 is simply an astonishing achievement for science fiction cinema. From Arrival to Blade Runner 2049 to Dune Part 1, Denis Villeneuve has proven himself time and time again to be a master of science fiction. And boy, does he just continue to win with Dune Part 2. The production value, the sound design, the costume design, the performances, the music, the storytelling, the scale. I don't know where to begin. This movie is a bit intimidating to talk about. Okay, how about I start with the fact that this film has banger scene after banger scene. Like the assault on the Spice Harvester where Paul and Chani are being attacked by ornithopters. So to avoid being shot, they have to move with the Spice Harvester's legs so they can stay in cover. Or how about when Paul rides the sandworm, the sense of anticipation that builds is like the ground explodes as it heads toward him. Booming sound design as he slides down towards it as the ground breaks away beneath him and he hooks onto its skin. How he can barely maintain his balance, his body flinging through the air as he clings on for dear life. And then the worm crashes into a hill, the aftermath of which sends huge bodies of sand smashing into him as he tries to stand up on 2 feet. Until finally he does manage to stand up on 2 feet, the sun shining down on him proudly and his brethren cheer him on. Or how we see this amazing gladiator fight down on planet Gedi Prime, the planet's black sun making everything appear black and white. The arena's scale is epic and you have these weird liquidy fireworks exploding in the sky. What transpires in that arena is less a battle and more of a mass murder, a slaughter. Every combatant except for Feyd is drugged so they can't properly fight back, so that Feyd can strike them down without resistance. Except for one other combatant who isn't drugged, and so they get down and dirty with it, touching the sand, striking each other harshly with their weapons. It is vicious and brutal. But beneath Dune Part 2's massive sense of scale is a haunting story about how the exploitation of religion can be used to control people. The Fremen of the desert start to see Paul Atreides as this messiah figure, the prophesied Lisan al-Gaib, and they start to worship him as such. And so Paul exploits their fanatical devotion to suit his own needs in a way that is fairly insidious and even disturbing. Stilgar, who was this tough authority figure who dared to challenge the Atreides family in Part 1, has been reduced to this blind follower of Paul, and though at times it's played for comedy, there's something profoundly sad about how blind his worship is. Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who in the first film was this terrifying, imposing figure, is given a much smaller role here. Now granted, he's still important, but he doesn't feel as much like a big shot. The scene towards the end of the film almost sort of frames him as small and helpless, lying in fear, waiting to get dispatched of without honor like a dog. And I think that helps to make Paul's corrupt rise to power feel even more effective. Paul's final knife fight with Feyd-Rautha is presented without any glitz or glamour, no music or anything, it's just shown as is. Paul is fighting Feyd here so he can rule over Arrakis and to serve his own needs, not for any noble or heroic reason. The motivation behind why this scene is happening in the first place is painfully cold, and as such, the scene itself is painfully cold emotionally. Timothée Chalamet's performance as Paul is absolutely incredible. The fact that in one scene he's speaking this fictitious language that was made up for the Dune universe, and it doesn't sound embarrassing, that in itself is incredible. But I think what makes this story truly work as well as it does for me is Chani's perspective. Given that she is Paul's lover and who sees a lot of good in him, seeing his downfall from someone with noble intent who wants to stand with and help the Fremen turn into this corrupt leader who uses them for his own needs is genuinely heartbreaking. Not only is she seeing the man she loves turning to something a lot more sinister and insidious, she's seeing her people get used in a way that they themselves do not see, and she is powerless to stop it. Zendaya delivers an incredible performance that really sells Chani's emotions, and honestly, her performance got me a little teary-eyed towards the end of the film. This film is just as much about Chani as it is about how Paul's rise to power corrupts him, and I love that. Dune Part 2 is epic and grand in scale. It's a technical marvel, but it also tells a gripping and emotionally investing story that continues from where Part 1 left off in a really satisfying way. The spectacle isn't at the expense of thoughtfulness. And that's what we need from modern Hollywood blockbusters, and that's why Dune Part 2 is my favorite film of 2024. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Your support really helps out. I also do written stuff over on Letterboxd, Backlogs, Serialized, and Goodreads. And I do photography and stuff over on my Instagram. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, link for all of those is in the description below. If you want to see my complete ranking of 2024, all the films from last year that I saw, link to my Letterboxd list of that will be in the description below also. And that'll continue to be updated as I watch more films from 2024. And yeah, that about covers everything I wanted to say. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye!